Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another edition of the Business of America. We have been focused on science, on innovation, on healthcare, startup firms and inventors who are in this space. And so the business of healthcare, we know about pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies. We know about insurance companies. We know about inventors and patents. But really the business of America, or in the business of healthcare, the focus is patients. The focus is patients and the research and the hard work done by physicians and scientists and medical providers and those who are doing the good research, so we can have advances in therapy. We can have a discovery on making patients more comfortable, live a better life, or, and we've talked about this in previous programs, the new cures, the new treatments for ailments we're not even thinking about right now. Today's show is interesting because we're going to talk a little bit about medicine in the context of climate and how that impacts science and medicine and patient care. And we're blessed. We have with us a researcher, a physician, University of Chicago, Dr. Iazsmin Bauer Ventura. And it really is a pleasure. Now, the good doctor and I haven't met before. And so this is going to be an introduction, not just to our listeners and viewers, but it's an introduction for me as well. And I've worked in healthcare policy, this space for a long time. And let me say this, it's a pleasure. And I'm so happy you made time for us today. I think it's going to be a great discussion. Before we start, though, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about your background, the medicine you practice, but also the research you're doing? And then we can start and kind of dig down.
Hi, it is really a pleasure being with you here today. Again, I'm so glad we find time in the very last minute to meet. So my name again is Iazsmin Bauer Ventura. I am a rheumatologist. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Chicago. So my practice has been focused on complex autoimmune diseases, multisystemic autoimmune diseases. I see a lot of patients with interstitial lung diseases. Those are chronic lung conditions that affect patients with a variety of different autoimmune diseases. And also, again, patients with complex autoimmune diseases such as myositis, systemic sclerosis, Sjogren's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. So my clinical practice has been really the source of my curiosity and the reason why I collaborate with physicians nationally and internationally to understand better how these diseases progress and how to better treat them. And part of my work has been in identifying what is actually causing autoimmune diseases. So this is a question that I get all the time from patients in clinic when we are breaking bad news about one's diagnosis and we are nailing down, again, what is the tag behind so many weird symptoms that developed before these patients come to see me. The main question that I get for patients and always puzzling is, why did I get this? Like, why did I get this very rare condition? Nobody in my family has it. Why me? Like, I was taking care of my life. I was like living a normal life and boom, out of nowhere, I was affected by these very weird symptoms. And sometimes it takes years for patients to be properly diagnosed with autoimmune conditions. Particularly in my arena, I treat rare conditions. So that question is always puzzling, and it is puzzling not for patients only, but for physicians alike. Because I tell them, it's like, I honestly don't know. And I think this is huge, right? Like so many patients, again, we don't have a clear estimation of how many patients live with autoimmune diseases here in the United States. We believe it is several million patients living with autoimmune conditions of all sorts in the United States. And we don't have great explanations to why they happen. Again, we now have better understanding about how patients develop specific cardiovascular diseases, dementias, right? We have been able to identify genes and risk factors for dementia, cancers, we have great now important work showing what causes a lot of the most common cancers. This is not true with autoimmune diseases. We are so behind in understanding what causes them. So because of that important question that comes every time I see a new patient in my clinic, I started grouping together with other physicians, other rheumatologists at the NIH and elsewhere. And I'm trying to understand how our environment and our lifestyles have impacted in the increasing incidence of autoimmune diseases over time. And again, we are going to talk a little more later on about a ongoing project that we have with several physicians here in the United States.
Well, it's interesting. You said a phrase that I think is refreshing when it comes to physicians and science. Sometimes the initial answer is, I don't know. And that's a good answer when you don't know. It can be frustrating, but what's more frustrating is the promise, I will know, give me more time, we're going to fix this. And in reality, you're not there yet. I think that's an important answer. I also think that Americans and patients broadly, but Americans even more broadly, they think that doctors know everything. Well, he's a doctor. She's a doctor. And they don't. Just a quick personal story. My father had a stroke this week.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
And he's doing well, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for that. But there are lots of questions, and there is some confusion. And I was talking to my mom last night, and my mom said to me, "Why can't the doctor just tell me?" And I said, "Mom," because the doctor's trying to figure it out. And in this case, it was, he might have had two strokes that impacted two different parts of his brain, which is why the doctors are trying to figure this out. But I said to her, be patient. They're doing their job. And I think that that's an important lesson, that doctors do the best they can with the information that they can. That's why developing science and doing the research, doing the investment, either private sector investment or public sector investment into research is so important. You mentioned chronic disease. We're going to hear a lot about, we're in the post-2024 election. We're about a week out from the presidential election, the congressional elections. There's going to be lots of talks about budget cuts and deficits, and we have to make priorities. And I'll say this, chronic disease is a serious issue, not just in your space, autoimmune and rheumatology, but just broadly. And we have to make the investments, both public and private, to get a hold of these things. And we've made great advances. I mean, we're blessed to live in a, everyone talks about how it was better in the old days. I'm not sure when that was. But the science advances and the technologies we're seeing now, the new cures, medicines, vaccines, we really do live in a kind of a miraculous time. But tell me about your research and about the environmental factors that might be impacting autoimmune diseases and rheumatology. And also maybe give a little bit of a quick definition, if such a thing exists, of autoimmune diseases. Yeah. I know you mentioned chronic lung disease. You say cancer, everyone knows cancer, right?
Right.
I just mentioned stroke, heart disease, but rheumatology and autoimmune, this is a little more mysterious. So let's talk about your research, but maybe first give us a little bit of background on these two things.
I'm so glad we're studying there, because you're right. Rheumatology seems to be this mysterious area in medicine. And I'll be very honest with you, this is not only for patients. Our colleagues in other areas of medicine, they feel the same. They have no idea what we do. They know we treat weird stuff and mysterious diseases, but they actually don't know what we do. So I'm so glad we're studying there. To your point, we don't have a great definition of what an autoimmune disease is. So I think the most accepted way to think about this is that these are usually chronic conditions that happen because of a dysregulated immune system.
And chronic means that you could have this condition
for your life.
For life. Okay.
We are talking about diseases that affect individuals for their lifetime, and they are not curable.
Wow. Okay.
This is important to acknowledge. So we're talking about chronic diseases, and we'll get to this later on because I really think this is important. We're talking about chronic diseases that are hard to treat a lot of times. We cannot treat them in the vast majority of times. And huge investment from the public and private sector needs to come into play to treat those patients. So again, I think this is just a quick note of the huge financial and social impact of these diseases in the United States and internationally. Huge. But again, we'll get to it in a little bit. Let's start from the beginning. What is an autoimmune disease? So the immune system, it is...
You reminded me of an REM song. What was it? Beginning at the beginning or whatever it was. REM, a band from the 90s. I'm sorry, but a little rock and roll trivia right there for you.
Sounds good. So our immune system evolved to keep us safe, right? Keep us safe from invaders. We are talking about bacteria, fungi, viruses, and also cancer cells. So our body, as our cells replicate over time. Every so often, some cancer cells show up, some cells, they're not functioning properly. Our immune system recognize those cells, recognize those viruses, bacteria, fungi, and boom, kill those cells, right? Keep us protected. So that's the role of our immune system, and our immune system is beautifully complex, and it has evolved throughout millions and millions of years. This is a good functioning immune system. So we get an infection, let's say a flu, and we get sick for a little bit. And then after our immune system kind of developed this reaction, this inflammatory reaction, which is important to keep us safe and healthy and recover from this infection, our immune system resets back to its baseline. In some patients, for reasons that we don't fully understand, our immune system overreacts. Instead of resetting back to baseline, to a good, normal, again, kind of function that is just surveillance, right? Keeping us aware about what's going on and protected about these invaders and cancer cells. Our immune system starts causing inflammation for no specific cause, or at least not that we know. And this inflammation propagates over time. And this inflammation causes damage in our own organs. So again, instead of targeting a bacteria or a virus or a cancer cell, this regulated immune system is targeting self. So that's where the auto in the nomenclature comes in. So auto, because it's targeting self. Autoimmune, because the immune system is targeting self. And again, what causes that? So the overall paradigm hypothesis that is well accepted by the public and the scientific community is that probably in patients who are genetically predisposed, and I want to mention something important here. It is very rare at all that we find 1 or 2 or 3 genes that cause this genetic predisposition. Is likely a combination of hundreds of different genes that make one more susceptible to autoimmune diseases. When the susceptible person, it is interacting with something in the environment.
Yeah.
That's what we believe triggers this autoimmune condition.
On a very simple base level, so we can wrap our heads around this. When I was a kid, I suffered terribly from asthma. But on a normal day, I was fine. Mm-hmm. And I lived in New York City. And however, if air quality was bad that day, this was before a lot of the environmental laws.
You will notice that your asthma was clearing up, right?
Or if I went to my cousin's house and they were supers in the building and they lived in the basement apartment, the dust and the dander from animals, and it would trigger my asthma.
Yep.
So what you're saying is there are things, environmental and other, that can trigger this kind of response in our immune systems.
And chances are this is a multifactorial environmental thing. Let's say, again, you mentioned asthma. Asthma is a great example because we know something about the impact of the environment in asthma. We know when there is a huge amount of pollen everywhere, and this is being exacerbated by the rising temperatures and the changes in our weather, the folks who have asthma are more likely to come to the emergency rooms and require hospitalization. We also know there in New York City, we're talking about Bronx, for example, the kids in Bronx have the highest prevalence of asthma in the United States.
I was one of them.
See, we have a living organism to testify. That's the truth. So, and research has shown that, again, these kids have been around roads, right? Their apartment buildings, their complex where they live
Sure.
is surrounded by traffic, very heavy traffic. How is that contributing to the risk of developing asthma? So again, asthma is just a wonderful example of how the environment triggers these conditions. And again, there's something about the immune system in a predisposed person that, again, in interaction with these environmental factors, triggers this dysregulated immune response, causing disease such as asthma.
It seems to me that again, in terms of because research is expensive, and because again, we said it 3 or 4 times already, public sector investment, spending from governments and public health entities, but also private sector investments. These things are expensive, but I want to throw something out there, and that is, it's more expensive not to do the research.
So
you mentioned before the social and economic impact of chronic disease. Well, if you're a small business owner, or if you're the CEO of a corporation, and you have a workforce that is impacted by chronic disease, well, they're less productive. The bottom line suffers. You're not creating the wealth necessary. And so therefore, it seems to me that the private sector ought to take a keen interest in solving some of these chronic disease issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're not talking only about, oh, my grandma has rheumatoid arthritis. She's very retarded and maybe it's hard for her to cook because her hands are very swollen and painful and stiff. This is not the case. We are talking about the working part of our lives being severely affected. So again, just to give you an estimation, here in the United States, we believe that, for example, back in 2001, beginning of the 2000s, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases looked at the cost of caring for patients with autoimmune conditions here in the United States in that year. I think it was 2001. And the cost for treating of these 20 million people at that time, corrected for inflation, was about $168 billion.
Wow.
This is how much the U.S. spent last year on the Departments of Homeland Security and Interior combined. So you understand, when we are talking about health, we are really talking about our economics, right?
Absolutely.
And again, the workforce, people who are my age, your age, otherwise would be absolutely capable of having a normal functional life and contributing to their community and the economy of their country, not being able to work, and most importantly, being a huge social and financial burden, unfortunately, because they have a illness that is incurable and is extremely expensive to cure. Again, you probably have seen all those commercials in the television of Humira, Enbrel, so on and so forth.
No, I haven't seen any of them.
Yeah. So you probably have those treatments sometimes $100,000 per year per patient.
Iazsmin, I watch old person TV nowadays. I find myself, I have kids, and so I make sure that what's on the TV set won't offend their little eyes. You know what I mean? So I watch mysteries and Blue Bloods, and I'm bombarded with the pharma commercials, and I think it's kind of funny because obviously the demographic was watching this, but But I have to ask you this because you make sense. But healthcare, health policy, health economics, the business of healthcare, it seems that we can only talk about health in a certain bucket. And even policymakers, we had an event on here in DC recently where we had a congressional staffer come and talk about price transparency and the cost of medicines. And this woman was brilliant, was smart, and she was leaving the Hill to go work in the private sector. She had worked 5 years. She had 5 years experience in health policy, and she was the most experienced staffer on the Hill, and she was leaving. But my response wasn't so much that she's leaving, good for her, but 5 years. That was the extent of her experience. We're not investing the intellectual capital into health policy, because I think we need to redefine the debate. It shouldn't just be about the cost of NIH or the cost of HHS or the cost of this. Conservatives like to talk about we got to cut the costs, and my more liberal friends like to talk about we have to increase access. Both are right, and I think that if we can redefine how we talk about it, we can change the dynamic. We need to understand that health impacts every other sector of the economy, and we don't talk about it that way.
Yes, and Jerry, you point a very important thing. It is one thing talking about even treatment and access to healthcare. And again, I just gave a quick example of how expensive treating these conditions. Again, a medication that I use every day, that I put a prescription in for every day, is at least $100,000 per person per year.
Wow.
So now try to multiply this to millions and millions and millions of folks around only the United States. I'm not even talking about internationally. But what if our focus is on prevention? What if we
don't start talking about common sense? No one's ever going to listen. Yeah. I agree with you, of course.
But what if
preventive
we avoid
medicine.
People to actually get sick in the first place?
We talked about this again. I'm involved in health policy, and it's pneumonia season,
right?
And we're talking about how the ACIP at CDC, the entity that governs vaccine policies, just lowered the age for pneumonia vaccines, the recommended age, from 65 to 50.
Mm-hmm.
And
in addition to chronic illnesses as well. So folks with asthma and chronic kidney disease.
And this is a great policy decision by CDC, because at age 50, you can get knocked out for 2, 3, 4 weeks with pneumonia. You'd be better off not being in the hospital and going to work and taking care of your kids. But there are folks who don't like this because, well, if it's recommended, then Medicare and the insurance industry has to pay for it. But that's the wrong question, or that's the wrong concern. The concern should be, what if we don't pay for it? What if it's not subsidized or paid for? Then what's the cost of the hospital stay? What's the cost of that worker being out 4 weeks? What's the cost to the family when their mom or their dad can't coach, can't cook, can't be involved?
The magnitude of expense when you're treating these conditions, when someone is actually ill, it is in orders of magnitude higher. So again, but the problem
preventive care.
Preventing autoimmune diseases, it is, again, the most ultimate important issue that we need to address. But in order to do so, we need to learn first what is actually causing it. Again, I'm coming back to the beginning.
Yes, it's in the back of my head, the patient survey. Is that what we were talking about? Yes. The patient survey. Tell us about this. It's an online patient survey of the impact of weather events, the environment on autoimmune issues.
Yeah. So let me give you a little bit of background and to the listeners as well. So again, we are trying to understand, myself and our mentors from the NIH, we are talking Stanford, Harvard, etc. So we are trying to understand again why we're seeing an increase in autoimmune diseases. Why so many people are being diagnosed. Just to give you a perspective, the last 30 years, the incidence, the amount of new people being diagnosed with diabetes type 1 has increased by 3% every year.
Every year?
Every year.
Not just 3% over 30.
No.
3% every year.
So what
Wow.
the heck is happening, right? So we don't believe, there is no reason for us to believe this is because of genetic causes. Our genes have not had time.
Right. Right. If that was the case, we would see a 3% increase every year forever. But there's been there's a mark in time where you see this change.
That's right. That's right. What happened in the last few decades that we're seeing increase in autoimmune diseases? And again, diabetes type 1, I think, is a nice one as a nice example, because again, we can track those folks who are insulin dependent. So again, if this is not explained by genetic factors, because our genes did not have time to evolve in just this amount of time, it is something in the environment. So we are talking about our lifestyle changes. Again, the way we live our lives is dramatically different to what our grandparents lived their lives, in terms of what we eat, the quality of the air that we breathe, the quality of the water that we drink, the amount of pesticides and other additives that we have in our food, and also this new and ever more frequent and intense weather events. I mean, a huge hurricane will happen every so often, but now every year it is a hurricane that has never been seen before. Every year is a drought that has never been seen before. And we don't know why. We know why, right? Like climate change. I mean, this is beyond now. Now it has become common sense that climate change, it is the driving force behind this more frequent weather and more intense weather events. But what is the impact of these weather events to the health of Americans? And are these weather events at all being associated with flares of autoimmune disease? As you mentioned, treating someone who needs to be hospitalized because of a flare, because of an acute illness, is extremely expensive, detrimental to not only to the economy, but for this patient's families and community as well. And also, are these weather events at all associated with new autoimmune diseases? We just don't know. And most importantly, again, we're talking about access. As I mentioned, these patients need quite often medications that need to be refrigerated, that needs to be, again, delivered from different states.
Sure.
And it's a very complex mechanism. How is the care of those patients who have complex autoimmune diseases being impacted by this severe?
Supply chain. And, it's interesting. A friend of, again, I think personal stories are important in medicine.
Absolutely.
So a friend of ours is in the hospital in California, and they're having trouble with treatment because the plastic bags necessary for the IV, there's a shortage.
Yes.
Because of Hurricane Helene.
Yes.
In North Carolina produces this medical
so North
equipment.
Carolina is the main, there's a plant in North Carolina that was affected by the Hurricane Helene that is the main producer of IV fluids.
Yes.
In the United States.
Yes.
So we are talking about IV fluids. They're necessary for dialysis. I don't even
Right, and they're impacting patients.
Everywhere.
Even at my dinner table last night, we're talking about how Hurricane Helene impacted a patient that we know in California.
Mm-hmm. I'm here in Chicago, and I had several patients who developed important adverse events from a medication because they were not able to receive the IV fluids that had been produced in North Carolina plant. So you see, no one is spared from the effects, from the downstream consequences of these weather events. This is irrespectively of political, regional divisions.
Sure. Let me just mention this, and this is not your area, but let me mention it because I've worked in the think tank community for a long time, and there was years ago there was always this argument that if climate change is real, climate change is real. Climate change is occurring. I think there's agreement on that. But how you deal with it, the policies to deal with it will have an impact on health, on housing, on wealth, and all the rest of it. And I think, and I'm sure people watching our program are going to hear climate or climate change and think, oh, Here we go again, climate change. But the fact of the matter is the climate is changing. There's been 2023 was the warmest year on record. They're saying now that 2024 may be the warmest record, even greater than 2023. However, I mean, we had a cooling period from 2015 to 2022. But regardless, it's still climate change. We don't talk about global warming as much as we used to because now it's climate. Because there are radical shifts in climate. Now, how you deal with that is a political question that divides us. So you're going to have those on the right who say, well, if you stifle energy, if you stifle innovation, we're going to increase poverty. Increased poverty increases environmental problems. And then you're going to have others who say, no, we need to invest in make sure that alternative energy and solar and nuclear, whatever, we need to have heavy investments in these. And then we politicize it. So you're doing a simple survey of patients. You're looking at the science and the impact of what's happening. There's no politics involved.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Right. But my question to you, though, is how do we keep the politics out of it? So we can just look at the results and know what we know.
And again, I think the scientific rigor, it is the fundamental core of the answer to this. Our survey is just asking how many times you others who have an autoimmune disease had flare since July 2022 and now. And if you have experienced any weather event, that's all. And if this weather event was associated with problems in connecting with your doctor, problems having your medication with you from your pharmacy, that's it. I am not asking if you believe, if you don't believe. I'm just.
I know, and I don't mean to imply that. Here's the thing, and I'll just give you an example. Vaccines save lives, but because of the COVID politics, we now are having a debate over vaccines, and I think it's frustrating. Yeah. I think that we politicize the science, and now we're having this political discussion over vaccines that we shouldn't be having. Yes, and the same thing here. Autoimmune investment in this area, public and private. The private sector has to be concerned about this. I just want to think about how do we stay out of politicizing this. I don't think you are, but someone will. Like someone will watch this program and say, "What happened to Rogers? He's gone off. He's become a green whatever." Right. And someone else might watch this program and say, "What's Jerry talking about? Building wealth? And why can't we just have the conversation and see where it goes, or do the research
exactly
and see where it goes?
Let's see the facts.
Let's
see the facts, and
oh God forbid.
Let's see the facts, and let's see where the facts lead us. Again, our survey is a very good example of this. We want to know how our patients with autoimmune diseases have been doing since 2022.
Is the survey still ongoing, or is it
the survey will be ongoing for several weeks. It is available, and again, I'll be happy to connect with you later on to see if there's any way you can we can distribute our QR code and the link to the survey.
I would like so you might not know this, but I'm the editor at Real Clear Health.
Oh, perfect.
If it's appropriate, I would love to link to this.
And the survey is available for everyone in the United States and Canada to complete, including parents of children who have autoimmune diseases.
Okay.
And again, it is a very quick survey, and all you want to understand is, hey, have you flared from your autoimmune disease in the last half a year, 1 year and a half? And have you ever experienced in this time frame any extreme weather events? That's always asking about.
Do you remember? You're in Chicago, so maybe not, but a year and a half ago or so, there were forest fires. Yes. I think in the New York area. I forget now.
No, there were important,
where were they?
Important fires in Canada.
And, in Canada, yes.
It's so interesting. It's so important you mentioned that, because one of the reasons this survey became became a product of our conversation within our group is because we meet every month, and then we were talking about a patient of mine, and then others have other examples. She has an autoimmune condition. She has a chronic lung disease, and she has been doing fabulous for years. I have been seeing her for over 7 years. And then she had a important flare and got her hospitalized of her lung disease. Wow. And then I needed to escalate treatment. She was on prednisone for several months. She's on important immunosuppressive medications now. So her treatment, which has been stable for years, needed to be escalated. When I look back to try to understand what the heck happened, she has been doing so well. She clearly identified the exposure to the wildfire smoke in Chicago.
Yeah.
Canada. In Chicago as the triggering event of her flare.
So again, this is the third or fourth time I've been given a personal story. My asthma has flared up again recently, and I've attributed it to COVID. I don't know why. My doctor doesn't know why. He says sometimes it comes back. But I remember during the wildfire, we had tickets to go see Robert Plant, it's a lead singer for Led Zeppelin. I love Robert Plant. And my kids had gotten us these tickets, and we went. And on the way, the concert was in Virginia, not far from DC, and the sky was red or discolored.
Yeah.
And we get there, and the concert was canceled because of poor air quality. And this is in the suburbs of DC for a wildfire that was happening thousands of miles away, or hundreds. 1,000 miles away, or at least 500, 600, 700, 800 miles away. And my asthma gets triggered if we have a fireplace in the house. Sometimes the smoke from the fireplace will trigger my asthma now, which is new. But my point is that these environmental triggers, you don't have to be, again, politically this way or that way. You don't even have to be a scientist or a doctor to understand. If you know someone with chronic lung issues, anything environmental can trigger it. I mean, something that's innocuous, something you wouldn't think could trigger it. And so this study of looking at the environmental extreme weather conditions and its impact on autoimmune is incredibly important. And, I'm not sure if, other than mutual colleagues, I hadn't heard of this survey until recently. And I'm glad I did. We will link to it at Real Clear Health. What else should we know about the work that you're doing? Did I skip something or miss something?
No, I think this is perfect. Again, we are talking about the cost of treating these diseases. We want to know why patients develop flares, why patients develop these diseases in the first place. Because let's say that specific weather events are associated with clusters of specific diseases in specific parts of America. We will be able to then propose, again, public policies and health policies to try to mitigate that. If, for example, I know that, hey, you have asthma, and we know that your asthma is more likely to flare during this time of the year because of your exposure to these specific problems in terms of air quality, you will be able to, again, be instructed by your physician, right? And again, something that needs to come from public policy as well, that, hey, during this time of the year, when the air quality is this bad, I know I should avoid exercising outdoors. Small things like this have not yet.
I have no problem avoiding exercise outdoors.
Yeah, but you see,
I'm sorry. I get your point. Yes.
Yeah, these small recommendations are so important. We also know, for example, that floods and these increasing temperatures have been associated with increase in exposure to Lyme disease and other infectious diseases.
Really?
And those infectious diseases can trigger autoimmune diseases. Again,
yes, I know.
Triggers. So again, hey, I'm someone who already has an autoimmune disease or have an important family history of autoimmune disease. I'm going to a place that didn't have ticks until very recently, but now it does because of increasing temperatures. I need to be more aware on how to protect myself.
And again, how this connects to other issues, I think there's a vaccine for Lyme disease. or at least there's a developing vaccine for
I
it.
am pretty sure that someone is probably working on a vaccine.
Working on it, yes. Yeah.
But
I only know that because I was recently asked by a group, do I know anyone who has had Lyme disease? We'd like to have them in this documentary series. And my daughter had Lyme disease. And so and she was treated and she's fine. But regardless, so I know I think there's good science being done in this area. But my point is that if you know, then your doctor can prescribe not just medicines, but also lifestyle changes, diet changes, and these sorts of things. And again, for our friends who are worried about the cost of all this, I also want to reiterate that the cost of not studying, of not engaging, is greater. You just mentioned the cost is in the billions of the terms of the chronic disease costs. And what is that in terms of economic growth and wealth and building wealth, but also social impact and absent moms and dads and family members and this sort of thing.
And Jerry, I want to mention as well something that is even more, again, we have kids, right? We want our kids to fulfill their potential. Yes. And what we are seeing is that in record numbers, kids and adolescents and young adults are being affected by these chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases.
Younger and younger. And this is something that has changed over the last 30 years.
So now we have clear evidence that some of the biomarkers, again, blood tests that we do to identify one's risk to develop specific autoimmune diseases have increased 300 times in young individuals. We're talking about children and adolescents. Can you imagine having a child undergoing cognitive, emotional growth?
Sure.
Now having the burden of a disease that cannot be cured. It is outstanding. So I'm pledging here again for us to focus on the facts and on the science, because irrespective of our political affiliation, all of us want to see our kids to develop their full potential. And what we are seeing is more and more kids being affected by chronic illnesses.
Yeah. You know, what I've been saying is, and we'll end here, good science, good health, and good policy. That should be the goal. You mentioned facts. I know science develops. I know that there might be something today, that might be in the mainstream, but it might change later. Science is constantly developing. We have to give physicians and scientists like yourself the freedom to not know sometimes, like we started the program there. It's okay sometimes not to know, but that's why we're studying. It's okay sometimes to understand that the science is developing. We're not going to have all the answers right now. But that's why we have to go through the process. And the process needs to be, we have to exercise goodwill and trust. And to the extent that we're able to, let's not politicize or weaponize science. Let's make sure the scientists and the physicians and those in your field can do the good work. You're doing good work, and I congratulate you and I appreciate it. And I so thank you for being on the show today. Any last words? Any final word? Last word? We're done with disease.
I'll be very honest.
Any final words for the program?
I'll be very honest. I feel like I could talk about this topic
forever, right? I know. We could go on.
There's so much about this, but I just want to mention, that I totally agree with you. Let's just again come from a humble standpoint. That hey, we don't know, and that's the reason why we need to know.
Yes.
And the only way to get there is that we study these things together with a lot of with a mentality that things need to be following a very clear methodology. It needs to be away from, again, biases, political biases, so we can you can get the answers that we all deserve. And again, whatever is happening with our climate, again, you need to be hiding in a bunker to not seeing your climate change. I'm sorry, irrespective of where we live, I mean,
I would love to be living in a bunker though.
Exactly. So unless we're living in a bunker, you've seen that, hey, this weather is kind of behaving oddly. And we know why it's happening. We don't know yet what is the impact of that in our health. And that's the reason why we're doing the study. And I really want to say this study, it is one of many that needs to be conducted so we can provide answers to our patients. I'm hoping that in the future, when a patient comes to me and say, doctor, why did I develop this rare autoimmune disease? I'm going to say, I actually have an idea. And that's coming from the important work that others, and I'm just a little piece in this big network of folks who have a very, very well-intended heart and mind to just answer the important questions to our public.
So I'm going to make sure that we link to the study at Real Clear Health.
Yes.
If you don't mind, let's stay in contact. I'd like to know more about this and more about your work. You said a couple more weeks or several more weeks for the study. Would you come back?
It's going to be on for a few months, and I'll be
a few months. Okay.
Back whenever we.
I would love for you to come back, and maybe colleagues, and maybe even have a more of a panel discussion.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
About the findings and that sort of thing. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. For taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy day. It's been our pleasure, and thank you very much.
Jerry, thanks so much for having me, and thank you for your work, because there's nothing that we do in the research side that without your helping disseminating this information out there to the public, nothing gets done. So I really appreciate your partnership, and again, I would love to come back in a few months with other colleagues to discuss this important topic.
Excellent. Well, this is we're closing the book on another important conversation, the business of America. We started out by saying, the business of healthcare, patients, science, cures. And these are the doers, the scientists, the physicians who are doing this work. These are the doers. These are the innovators. And this is the focus of the business of America. So thank you again for watching, and tune in next week for another episode of The Business of America. Thank you.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream